Welcome to the world of real entertainment. You are about to experience Rocket Ride to Stardom, the second volume of All the King's Men, a revealing look into the private life of Elvis Presley. Watch for the release of future tapes in this exciting series, coming soon on home video. Stay tuned for an exclusive preview following the show. The world remembers Elvis Presley as the king of rock and roll, but he was much more to 5 loyal friends. Cousin Billy Smith, teenage companions Lamar Fike, Marty Lacker, Red West, and Red's cousin Sonny West. Because of their fierce devotion to Elvis, the 5 became known as the Memphis Mafia. Closer than brothers, they served Elvis as trusted confidants, court jesters, and tireless protectors. Join them now for the provocative, hilarious, moving, and endlessly fascinating tales of All the King's Men. Here for the first time on video. It was an ordinary morning in the Deep South. Vernon and Gladys Presley, dirt poor, barely educated, and without much hope, were about to have twins. Then at 4:35 a.m., the legend began.
As Elvis told it, it was a very unusual morning. It was this purple haze and this nice blue ring around the moon and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, so it couldn't have been a normal birth, you know.
Oh, Vernon told him, too, that he was special because Elvis said that Vernon told him that when Elvis was conceived, Vernon blacked out.
Jesse was the first one born, and of course he was born still dead, you know, and they brought him on out from behind. They had the sheet hung up because it lived in just a one huge room house is all it was, and they had him laid out on the table and all. And of course, Elvis was born, you know, just a few minutes later.
Dr. Hunt, who had delivered so many babies in East Tupelo, asked Vernon what the child's name was when Elvis was born, and Vernon, for some reason, always pronounced Elvis's name Elvis and left the L out, more or less, which is kind of unusual because his middle name is Elvis. And he said Elvis Aaron Presley. And that's what Dr. Hunt wrote down. E-V-I-S. Aaron spelled with 2 A's because that's normally the way Aaron is supposed to be spelled. Vernon couldn't spell, and when he went to register the birth certificate, he didn't know it was 2 A's, and he just said 1 A. And in '66, I had asked him, you know, how come it's 1 A when, you know, Aaron in the Bible is 2? And he looked at his daddy and he said to me, he says, well, you know, back then most people couldn't spell. And then he looked at his daddy and he said, from now on all the legal papers, I want 2 A's. And so hopefully that'll clear up all this mystery about whether there's, and that is why there's 2 A's on the plate over his grave instead of 1.
In the pre-war depression-suffering South, blues and gospel were harvested. Young Elvis was fascinated by this truly American sound, with its sweet, steamy heat and soulful rhythms. He loved it from his earliest days, taking it in and spinning it out in an interpretive style that became his own.
It's a little place in Tupelo called Shake Rag, which we lived in a place called Satella. And you had to go by Shake Rag in order to get home. A lot of times, if you go to town, you walk back, you know, or you drove, but most of the time you walk because it was a short distance. And a lot of times Elvis would want to stop and listen because it would be like at night, and you'd hear these blacks, they would be singing, you know, different things, blues, gospel. And of course, you couldn't stay a long time, but he would sit there and listen a lot of times to it. About the age of 2, I guess, is when he was really kind of exposed to religious music. They used to take him to church, you know, every Sunday, and the choir would sing, and even then, a lot of times, Aunt Greta said he would get up and ease down to the front where he could, you know, actually look up at him and listen to him.
With all of his gospel background, I mean, he loved gospel music, and some of the best, one of the best albums he ever did is a gospel album.
You know, I think part of it too was Chief with the Statesman, who Elvis really, really liked. It was with the Statesman Quartet. When he was young, he used to go down to the Memphis Auditorium and watch these gospel.
Elvis Auditorium, yeah.
He noticed, because this Chief, slick gray hair, you know, he'd get out there and he'd start, every time he opened his mouth, he'd start moving. And it affected the women. And Elvis saw that. He commented about that later, too, that he used to watch Chief, you know, get up there on the stage. He said, because he always noticed when Chief did that to women, gospel women went nuts.
He was real shy. Now, at home, he would move. We got a piano for Christmas one time, and I never, you know, took music at all and didn't care really much about it.
We could tell.
And thank you. Play the drums on your head, though.
Good line.
But anyway, he came over one time, and he was playing the piano, and he was moving around and jumping around. Of course, I was a kid, and I thought, you know, guy's crazy, really, and I didn't think much about it. But in front of other people, if somebody came over, he wouldn't hardly do it. Yeah, real shy. He wouldn't do it.
He was brought up at a time when Dewey Phillips broke the mold, started playing black music. Well, Dewey, that wild man, he started playing it, and all the white kids started hearing this other music, and Elvis liked it, and that's where he got his style from the blacks. That's how rock and roll was born, from blues and gospel to rock and roll.
His passion for performing ignited high school audiences, giving Elvis an appetite for the spotlight. After he recorded a demo at Sun Records, an assistant convinced owner Sam Phillips to formally audition the promising young talent. In a test session, Elvis was teamed with 2 local musicians. The result was Elvis's first hit, That's All Right.
Sam Phillips introduced me to him in '54, and I had met him, and, you know, of course, I thought he was one of the strangest looking guys I'd ever seen in my life. And I thought he did swing from a tree. Right after that, I was going downtown to see a show at the Malco Theater, and I had my car radio on, and it played, and so I stopped by the station. And Dewey was, because I had known Dewey, and went up there, and that's the first time I'd heard it. I said, you know, this is the guy that Sam Phillips introduced me to. He said, yeah, it's the same one. And it was just so different. The song was just, everything that was out, because back then it was Tony Bennett and Sinatra, and, you know, it was just so different. I couldn't believe it. I said, this thing's stronger than Tarzan's armpits, you know?
We were listening to Dewey Phillips, as all the kids did, you know, back then. And he starts talking about, I got this boy here from Memphis, and he's brand new, and this record is going to be a hit, going to be a smash hit. And Dewey used to talk real fast, you know, and we both looking at each other, because he says this boy from Humes High School. We couldn't figure out who it was. He didn't even mention his name at first. He plays the record. And the record was darn good. The record's over, and he says, Elvis Presley. And both Monty and I, who had gone to Humes, looked at each other like, I mean, we couldn't believe it.
His mother and daddy, I don't know if it's the first time they had heard it on radio, but they came over, and they knew it was going to be played. And they came over and was all excited, you know, about it. And it was exciting. I thought, God, you know, it's unbelievable. It's my cousin here, you know, and he's on the radio. You know, it just was, the feeling's just really hard to describe. It really is. You know, I mean, you got somebody that's done something in the family, because I'm going to be honest with you, nobody had. So
I was a senior in high school, and I was in Air Force Reserve. I was in the barracks. Somebody had the radio on, and I heard, That's All Right, Mama. And I thought the voice sounded familiar, and then at the end it said Elvis Presley. And I remember I was just kind of shocked. You know, that was a big deal. Somebody you knew at school had a record on the radio. You know, that was everybody's dream, and I'll never forget it. I just stood there and I don't believe this.
Yeah. Well, I saw him the first time at Tech High School at the campus at lunchtime when he came over there just by himself, and he sang some of his songs, and no idea of what he was going to do. And then I went on into the Air Force, and the next thing I know, it's 1956 or 57, and he's on tour, and I've been playing his record. My favorite one at the time was I Was the One. I played that thing over and over. I got in fights over that. Because back then you had to play, you got 3 plays or something for a quarter, and you couldn't punch them in one right after the other. You had to wait till it finished playing, and then you punch it again. Otherwise, it would just play at one time. So I'd stand there and I wouldn't let anyone get in that jukebox till I had heard my I Was the One 3 straight times.
When I first went on the road with him, he came to Humes one day in that green coupe Lincoln. I was getting on the bus just with my football uniform on. We were getting ready to go to Bartlett to play a scrimmage game there. He pulled up behind, got out, and he was going in to school. You know, his hit record was going good, and he just wanted to come back and visit everybody.
Yeah.
Exactly.
He was.
Exactly.
That's what he was doing.
And I was just getting on the bus, and I said, "Hey, Elvis," and he read. He walked over. We started talking. I said, "You know, I'm going out to play football," and he said, "Well, how would you like to, I'm doing a show down in Grenada or somewhere, you know, just around Memphis, and how'd you like to go with me?" I said, "Hey, that's great." So I started traveling with him, and to little places like Grenada, and then a little later on down to the Louisiana hayride. This is when another trend started, the bodyguard bit, I guess. Just he and I, he had done the show in Grenada. We got stuck going in there first. We got stuck, it was raining. And we tried to get the car out, and he got mud on the seat of his pants. And this was what he's going to wear on stage. It was a new car. He just got the Crown Victoria. Is that it? Yeah. And he was kind of being easy with it. You know, he didn't want to mess it up. I said, "Let me in there. I'll get this." So I put it in reverse and forward, and I got it out. And I didn't hurt it, but he was outside, and it slung mud on him. So we got in the car. He went down, did the show. We met 2 girls. After the show, we went over to their apartment. Nothing outrageous, you know, sit around talking. Then we went to this little gas station restaurant right in the middle of Grenada. It was about the only thing that was there then. And we're over in the corner. We'd ordered cheeseburgers or whatever, and these 2 rednecks walk in. I'll never forget this. This little jerk walked in and said, "There's the son of bitches." Walked over and sat down at the counter, and I said, "What the hell is he talking about?" And he saw this mud on the seat of Elvis's pants. After saying a few derogatory remarks, I'm sitting there listening to this stuff, trying to let it slide. But he said, "Look at him. He's shitting in his pants. He's so scared." And I said, "That's it." Elvis, no. I said, "That's it." I walked over. This little guy sitting at one of those little spinning stools. The other guy was standing here. And I said, "Man, something bothering you?" He said, "Yeah, you and your freaking friend over here, Bob, and I got something here in my pocket to take care of both of them." Well, he reached in his pocket, and I hit him, and he spun around off that stool right on the floor. And I got on top of him, hit him a couple times, and then I felt something grab me here, and I just automatically spun around and caught the other guy right on the chin, and his head hit right between Elvis's feet. And that was it. Oh, man. My first reaction, let's get the hell out of here. Cops coming, we're going to jail. And let's see through the glass. Elvis didn't explain to these guys. When another instance, Elvis and Scotty Bill was up there playing, and a fight broke out. Somebody stepped on one of Scotty's somebody's guitar, just went right through it. So they start picking the hell in the middle of the show. They start picking things up. The show was over. The fight was going. I mean, they were fighting all over the place. So I'm trying to get Elvis through the crowd, out to the parking lot. These little girls, "Can we have your autograph?" And Elvis said, "Yeah." You know, the fists were flying everywhere. We got out to the car, and I'm trying to get him in, man. And I'm looking. I'll never forget this. I'm looking at a car over here with 3 or 4 guys pulled this guy out with a beer bottle. They just systematically just pounded him into the dirt. And these fists were flying all around us, you know, and I finally got him in the car, and these little girls kept wanting these autographs. You know, the hell with the fight.
Elvis was a hit. His record was getting major local airplay. His personal appearances with Scotty Moore and Bill Black were the hottest attraction around. Talent promoter Tom Parker realized Elvis's potential and bought his contract from Sam Phillips for a fast $35,000.
The colonel told the family, you know, that he would take him, and within a year's time, he would be, you know, this big star. And he said, "I'll promise you within a year and a half, he'll be a millionaire." And he lived up to that. So it really, it bonded, you know, heavy with Elvis and Colonel and of course Vernon and Colonel naturally. You know. But As far as Aunt Gladys, she was quite content, pretty much like it was, but she didn't want to hold Elvis back, and she would, like I say, she praised everything he done, so she naturally went along with it.
She was a smart woman.
Yeah, and she never was comfortable with him.
Never
that's right.
Elvis was so non-confrontational. He just did not want to get into a confrontational situation with anybody. So he would retreat behind a wall of people. The wall of people would be Tom Parker and or us or somebody else, and he would retreat behind this wall, and he would be brave up to the time of the confrontation. Then he would retreat, and all of us would take the, we'd take the heat.
Colonel took it all off of him. All he had to do was say, call Colonel.
That's
and
right.
Colonel would take care of it.
Oh, yeah.
He used to call the Admiral. He used to call him
So
the
I
Admiral.
think that's that locking point that kept them together for so long, even though over the years Elvis started getting more disrespect for the Colonel, and Colonel was losing more control on Elvis, and it just developed into a situation there. But there for a while, it was just, get Colonel, he'll take care of it. That was the way he thought.
Elvis has rocketed to stardom. His concerts are sellouts. But fame brought controversy. He is accused of inciting riots and destroying the morals of American teens. His sexually charged performances are frightening parents and authorities as well.
This rock and roll rhythm is filled with dynamite, and we don't want the dynamite to go off in the Roosevelt Stadium in Jersey City.
Elvis was unstoppable. His raw, powerful magnetism was driving his fans wild.
It was a tour that we did up to the Northwest. It was Seattle and Tacoma and Portland and Vancouver. What happened was that they had Elvis down at the end of a football field, and it was on a flatbedded trailer, and they had this enormous steel fence with these spikes. The fans, I think it was about 15, 20,000, and they all could not get past that fence, and all of a sudden, they broke out and knocked the fence down. One girl had it gouged in her leg, and they all hit that football field at once, and they came toward that flatbedded truck, and Elvis was right at the edge, and we all immediately went up on the stage because we were going to try to figure some way to get him off, And so Elvis sat on the edge of the trailer and started dangling his feet. It was just like a wall of people, and they were coming toward him. He never flinched. He kept on singing the whole thing, and he would egg them on, and they started coming through that, and they lifted the bottom end of the trailer, and that's when everybody panicked. They almost turned the trailer over. It was really a riot. And they had the horses on the field knocking the people down as they were running. And the next day in the paper, we'd left that night on the train. The next day they said Elvis came in and raped Portland.
They did the same thing in Jacksonville. Yeah. And he wouldn't get off the stage again. And I think this time, Bill and Scotty grabbed him, pulled him off the stage, and the cops got mad at him backstage. They accused him of starting all this.
He had played somewhere in Texas, too, and they had
that was a Cotton Bowl.
Just a few fans started, and when they did, it seemed like all of them took it up. And they rushed, and the security was just nothing. And they said when they carried Elvis off, he was still holding the microphone singing, trying to, and it run right out, just jerked it out of his head. And they actually tore part of his clothes off.
Colonel Parker kept drilling to Elvis' head. He said, "Do not invite anybody out there." We know he told Elvis he can't do something. And he got out there, and the police said, "Be sure that nobody comes on that field." Elvis first saw him, said, "Everybody gathered, boy, here they came." And it was scary.
And he played with him, he'd grin, laugh, and then they'd hand him a microphone with a cord, and he'd start walking towards him. They'd start acting like and he'd let go, and like he's going to go back. He milked them, going back and forth to that car before he finally got up on stage and started performing. He loved it.
He played the audience.
Yeah.
And Tupelo, the same thing,
At the fair, yeah.
Yeah, they actually were picking him up and throwing him back, because he would make a move, and then he'd reach down, and get real close where they could actually touch him.
He carried this throughout the years, because even later, there's one song he used to get a kick out of, and he never could figure out why they'd go nuts, and that was Fever. And every time he'd move his leg to the drum beat, with Fever, go da-da-dum, and he'd move his leg, and the audience would go nuts, and he'd be on stage, he'd bust out laughing. He knew what he was doing. He started a revolution, in a sense, a youthful revolution, because kids were never able to do the things that, back then, parents didn't want kids listening to what was called race music.
George Harris said Elvis kicked the door open for everybody. John Lennon said he kicked the door, we all went in behind him.
He busted the doors wide open for black artists just as well as he did for rock and roll.
Elvis never forgot what it was like to be poor. He took great pleasure in his ability to shower generosity on others. It was a trait that would last his lifetime.
Franklin Delano Roosevelt's yacht, Elvis bought, the Colonel painted, had one side painted, because it was run down, you know. And he was going to give it to Danny Thomas. He gave it to Danny Thomas for the St. Jude. And Colonel Parker had the side that was going to be photographed painted, and the other side looked like,
And the dining table in it had Einstein's letter to Roosevelt about the atomic
Telegram,
bomb.
the Manhattan Project. But he got mad when we got back in the car after we came off the ship, and he had signed it over, and he was upset and mad. And we said to him, well, what's wrong? Because we thought everything was great on the boat. He said, you know what that damn Danny Thomas said to me when I was when we were up there signing the paper? I said, what? He said, what did you buy this piece of shit for? And we all looked at him and said, Carl, come on. He says, no, that's what he says. You imagine that? He said, we buy this thing and give it to him for St. Jude's Hospital. And, you know, I don't care if he sells it and takes the money and puts it towards St. Jude. It hurt his feelings.
He gave a lot of money to charities, and also he would find separate incidents, like he read in the paper or whatever in Memphis about this old black lady with no legs, and bought a motorized wheelchair and said, I don't want anybody to hear about this. He gave it to her, and this woman and her husband just overwhelmed.
They didn't know who he was.
You know what Elvis said? It doesn't matter. They know someone cares.
Yeah.
He came over to me and he said, let me have some money. And I said, okay, how much you want? He said, give me $300. And I put $300 in his hand.
Yeah.
And he walked over to the lady. The touching part, too, was the lady was sitting in a wooden chair, too, later. She was trying to get into the new chair. And he walked over to her and he picked her up in his arms, kissed her on the cheek, set her down in the wheelchair. He put that money in the lady's hand, and we walked out of that place and got in the limousine. He was feeling so good.
Yeah.
He said, okay, what can I do next?
That's right.
I know.
What can I do next?
He went out
and bought 3 cars and gave them away.
If he saw somebody that he thought was just, you know, really down, or he couldn't stand it, you know.
That's the way Elvis was, and never wanted anyone to know about it. Just do it. He had a big, big heart.
Do it and don't talk about
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
And when he gave you something, the same thing. Once your initial reaction is over, don't come back up to him later thanking him again. The one time, the shock, the excitement he sees on your face, and you thank him, that's his moment. After that, just enjoy it. Yeah, just enjoy it. That one moment.
Elvis successfully makes the crossover from music to film. In 2 years, he had 3 box office hits. His television appearances would be marked with controversy and personal embarrassment. All the fame and money would not prepare him for the series of events that would change him forever.
He came upstairs, and I was in the bedroom because we were been talking, and he came upstairs and he sang an old blues song. And I said, what are you talking about? And he handed this thing to me, and he said, I got drafted. I said, you're serious? He said, yeah. And I read it, and I said, I guess you are. He went to Fort Chaffee first, and then from Fort Chaffee he went to Fort Hood. But he just didn't want to go, and his mother didn't want him to go to Germany. She was more concerned about his safety. It was like, that's why she'd wake up in the middle of the night in these cold sweats, you know, because she thought something was going on. And I remember she'd always go out in the hall, and Elvis would come down the steps, and he had a way of petting her on the back all the time, and he'd talk baby talk with her, you know. Their connection probably, I don't believe I've ever seen anything before or since, as tight as they were. It was, I'm talking, boy, like, you know, like adhesive tape. It was
His nickname for her, you know, was
Satin, yeah. Which fattening baby talk.
She was heavy, and it's, you know, it's a short
Baby talk for
baby
fattening.
tape, right,
Yeah.
for fattening. You know. When she worried, she drank more. That family has a history of it. I mean, my father's in that family, and he did, and his brothers and all that, you know. And it brought that on, and by that, her drinking more, naturally, you know, it got to to some of the pill taking to lose weight, and two, not realizing, you know, when drinking and you're mixing this together, that's just not good, you know. And she already had liver disease, too.
Yeah, she said cirrhosis of liver.
She had it, my father had it, and Elvis had it. I mean, it run a whole lot in this family. She actually got sick while he was in Fort Hood doing his basic training, and Lamar was down there during that time. And they finally talked him into sending her back. And her and Vernon came back, and she immediately went right into the hospital. And of course, Elvis wanted to leave, you know, and he finally got it, and he came home. And of course, we went up to see her, and she was telling me, son, I'll be all right, you know, and everything. Just going. He said, well, I was going to go to the movie. He said, but after I get out of the movie, he said, I'll come back up here and see you and all. And she said, no. I said, that's okay. He said, you just go home and get some rest, and you can come back, you know, tomorrow and see me. Well, that night, he wanted me to stay up there with him. Everybody else had pretty much gone. I think Lamar was still there and had gone to take somebody home.
Take those girls home.
And so I was in the room with him. It was somewhere around 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. The phone kept ringing downstairs. He had a private number upstairs, so it kept ringing downstairs, and he just sat straight up, and he said, you might ought to answer that. So I got up, and of course, you know, I'm only 14 years of age, you know, at that time, so I run downstairs and I get it, and it's Vernon on the phone, and he says, you need to tell Elvis, and that's as far as he got, you know, and he was, by this time, I could hear him in the background, and, you know, he was sobbing, and the nurse took the phone, and she said, you need to tell Mr. Presley that his mother's taking a turn for the worse and needs to get up here. So I went back up, and I knew not to, you know, even at that age, I knew not to panic him too much. So I went up, I told him, I said, look, I said, the nurse called and said, you know, you need to come up here because your mama's gotten a little sicker. And in my mind, I pretty much already knew, you know, just from what I'd heard over the phone. So we immediately, man, he just threw some shoes on, no socks, a shirt, and we ran downstairs, and we jumped in the Lincoln Mark II that he had, and off we went, boy. And I mean, he didn't waste time. He didn't stop for red lights or anything else. And when he pulled in, he didn't even throw it in gear. He just jumped out. He applied the brakes enough that when he hit that little stop, that it stopped the car. But we never slowed up. And I finally went back and put it in park. And when he got upstairs, all he had to do is he made around the nurse's desk, and there was a long corridor. And when he made that turn, his daddy was standing outside, and that was it. You know, when they saw each other, he knew. I mean, he immediately knew. And of course, they just ran to each other and embraced each other. Boy, that was one of the most pitiful things you'll ever see.
First, I got the call in the morning about Gladys. And the phone rang again. It was my brother, and he said, Daddy is in bad shape. So I was still in the Marine Corps. I had like a couple of weeks left. So I went back to my commanding officer and told him that, and he got me a flight. But when I got there, it was too late. My dad had died before I could get there.
I was there because it was my uncle. In fact, one of my favorite, if not my favorite uncle. So when I was there in 1958, I was sitting there next to my dad. And all of a sudden, I hear a noise behind me, and I look back, and here in the family section, there's a door back there, and here comes Elvis and Lamar. And Red was up there near his dad's casket, and Elvis just started stumbling towards him, crying and sobbing and telling him, man, Red, my mom was just there. That's what's ironic, that they died the same day. They had the services in the same funeral home, in the same stateroom, one day apart. And that's what Elvis was telling Red. He said, my mom was there yesterday, Red, I know how you feel. And they hugged each other, and they walked up there and looked, and I tell you what, it was emotional, boy. I mean, everybody was caught up in it. It was just raw emotion. And he just told Red, he said, Red, anything I can do, man, let me know, okay? And they hugged, and then Elvis and them left. I tell you, I've never seen him like that. It was a thing the two of them shared. That was there again. There was just another bonding. From the high school, now he's bonded this way, and it's just something there, man. I don't know, but it was just something there that these two were meant to be together.
Just 1 month after the heartbreaking death of his mother, Elvis was sent to Germany. Still smiling for the cameras, Private Presley would soon face his own mortality.
Elvis was a scout. They were the first to go out, and they would go up.
They got killed first.
Yeah, their life expectancy was very short in a real shooting war. So he and the sergeants in a Jeep up on the border, and they watching the Russians on one side, whatever. It was freezing cold. So he and the sergeant...
He had bought a tank heater. Elvis had bought a tank heater to put in the Jeep.
Go ahead.
No, go, no, you...
No.
Well, he gave this guy in the motor pool $100 for this tank heater because he knew everybody up there just froze to death in their Jeeps. Well, those things are really enormous, and the guy didn't hook it up right, and the exhaust fumes came through it, and a puff of wind or something blew, and he was asleep. I mean, he was dying is what was happening. And he had the presence to roll out into the snow and kind of just got himself back together again. Then he pulled around and pulled the sergeant out. But they were going to, had he been there probably another 15, 20 minutes, he'd been dead.
And the press put out that he had tonsillitis.
In the barracks, Elvis would be a regular soldier, but off base, he would have a civilian life. In his second year of service, he would meet his future bride.
What happened was there was an individual who would come around us back and forth, and he said there's this real pretty girl that Elvis should meet. So I went over to Wiesbaden, and she's at the pool. He said she's at the pool on certain days, and so I went up there, and he pointed her out to me, and I said, good. And I mean, she really was pretty, you know. I came back to the house, and I said, let me tell you something. I said, there's a situation here. I said, she's really pretty, but I said, I don't think she's very old. And he said, really? And I said, yeah, Elvis. I said, you know, she's just young. Well, he started talking about it. Well, you know, the hairs on my arm stood straight up. I said, listen, I want her over here. So he brought her over, and I was in the living room when she came in, and I said, Elvis, this is Priscilla. Priscilla, this is Elvis. And it all... And I had the presence of mind. He walked out of the room from me, and I said, can I ask you a question? She said, yeah. I said, how old are you? She wasn't even 14 yet. And, well, when she said that, I just, you know, I spun, and I went out in the hall, and I said, listen, we're getting ready to have a big problem here, you know? And he said, what? He said, I said, oh, she's not even 14. He said, see, it did not mean anything to him because he was so surrounded by his people that he knew he could get away with it. And it was just, well, I'm not going to do anything. I said, who says that? And I said, I just had these visions of all of us just going to prison for life. You know, I was scared to death. I said, listen, and you know, nothing stopped him. He kept right on. Her father was very, very stern, Colonel Beaulieu. At that time, he was a captain. He was a navigator, and because he flew out of Wiesbaden, and got chewed out a bunch of times for getting her home late. One night we had a fog, real heavy fog, and I couldn't see, and I had to get her back at a certain time, and I knew I was running late, and I literally could not see past the end of the hood. I said, so I got Priscilla out and put her in front of the car, and I had her walk all the way into Wiesbaden so I could follow her. I could not see to get there, and that's the only way we got to the house. And then I got to the door, and I got chewed out by everybody. And I came back home. I said, listen, you got to have to work something out here, you know. And he said, well, what is it? I said, this is really getting bad here. He said, well, it's not bothering me. I said, no, it doesn't bother you. I said, I'm getting all the heat. And he said, well, you can handle it. And that's how he walked off. And I said, well, here we go again. You know, you'd have to have a bulletproof vest on a lot of times because you never knew what was going to happen.
A lot went on at the Grunewald. That's where a lot of history, bad or good, began. Vernon met Dee, and a relationship got started. And Elvis tried to stay away from it, you know, and he knew his dad was lonely. But when he found out that she was married, this upset him, but he didn't know what to do about it exactly. This would be in the daytime. Elvis would be gone to the post, and her husband would be gone to the post, and then Vernon would bring her there, and Minnie, Grandma, was there, Lamar and I, and we used to sit and listen to these escapades, you know, in the middle of the day, and it sounded like you're killing hogs somewhere or something. But that went on, you know, frequently, and then you remember Elvis was there, came in once, and told his dad later, said, you're going to take this somewhere else.
Elvis wouldn't go and say, hey, Dad, you need to do this or you need to do that. He wouldn't do that to Vernon because they were getting these arguments. And Elvis would really, in the end, when Vernon would jump on one of us, no matter what, Elvis, it was his father. He'd protect his father. Even though he'd be wrong, and we knew, Red and I both knew we were going to get the short end of the stick, so he just didn't argue with Vernon. But I did one day, and Elvis picked up a 3-layer cake, and just, boom, it went all over me, you know. And I said, well, look, he's wrong. And he said, well, it's Dad. He's not wrong. I said, okay. But, I mean, he told Red and I, he said, you know, stay with Dad as much as you can. And we did. We really sort of bodyguarded his father. And, you know, Vernon didn't like it. He didn't like it at all. He got pretty mad about it.
Vernon had told Elvis that, you know, he said they had, like you said, a big argument. He told him, like he told him, he said, I need somebody too. And so Elvis finally, you know, got to thinking about it, and he figured, you know, that's right. But what Elvis didn't want is he come to grips with that, but he didn't want it around him, even if it was his daddy. And so that was the biggest thing. He wanted to kind of keep it, you know, wanted his daddy to keep it kind of quiet and away.
Well, it started actually literally after the funeral. We had to go back to Fort Hood, and we were staying at the mayor's house. We had rented the mayor's house of Fort Hood, and at some exorbitant price. That's when Red came back, and Vernon was fooling around with 2 or 3 different women then, remember? And Elvis had come back from the post, and you or I, either one, would cover for him, you know. And he said, look, he said, you know, he got mad at me one day. He called me in the living room, and he said, you are lying to me. I said, about what? He said, Daddy. And I said, what about him? He said, see, you're lying right now. And I said, I'm not lying to you. He said, yeah, you are. He said, he's fooling around with some women. And I said, yeah, you know, and he got really upset about it. And I said, Elvis, I said, you know, come on. I mean, the guy's, he said, well, I didn't expect him to start fooling around with somebody this quick. And when Elvis and his daddy fought, it was really bad. I mean, Gladys and him getting a fight, it was different. But boy, when Vernon and Elvis getting a fight, it was one of those bad, because Vernon had a very sharp tongue. And he could...
He had his own ego, too, buddy.
Yes, sirree. And when they got in an argument, I mean, boy, you cleared, the place cleared real fast, because, you know, it was dangerous.
I only saw a couple of arguments between Elvis and Dad.
They were dangerous arguments.
Yeah, and I'm telling you, you could see Vernon Presley got the meanest.
Oh.
Boy, he could get mean as a snake with words and stuff, and start
He'd get real
cutting with
quiet.
that.
He'd get real
yeah,
quiet.
And you could see it, you know. And Elvis would try to hold it in, but at the same time, you could see Elvis was extremely angry too, boy. And the 2 of them, you just didn't know what was going to happen. I mean, you really didn't.
Those were I call dangerous arguments.
I never thought of anything physical happening. It wasn't like a fight, but you never knew what was going to be said that you can't hardly take back later. You've already made the cut, man.
I tell you, in line with that, we were sitting at Graceland about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Elvis had just gotten up and sitting in the dining room. He's eating breakfast, and he's sitting there, and there's 2 or 3 of us around the table with him. We're just, you know, quiet. You know, you had to be quiet till he had his first or second cup of coffee and woke up a little. Didn't like to talk business, certainly wouldn't do it until after he ate or whatever. And Vernon walked in and said, son, we got a problem. But I don't want to hear it, Daddy.
That's right.
Did not raise his head up. He still went on in. He said, I don't want to hear it right now. Vernon, I pictured, he's standing up against the wall by the windows in the dining room. And Vernon kept on. And Elvis said, I don't want to hear it now. I don't want to talk about it now. And Vernon said something else. And Elvis looked at him and he says, look, goddammit. I said, I don't want, he said, you know better than to come talk to me about business before I've had my breakfast and what have you. And Vernon mouthed off at him. He says, look, I'm the goddamn boss here. Elvis said that to his father. And his father said, yeah, but you ain't man enough to make me do it. And Elvis says, well, by God, I am. He says, I'm a lot more man than you are, to his father.
Oh,
and Vernon said, no, not even half. And Elvis got up, picked up a chair and the plate, both at the same time, wham, across the room, and went upstairs.
If you got in the middle of it, the whole thing changed. His daddy only turned on you, but he turned on you. So you was caught in the middle. It's best you didn't say anything. Just let him go at it regardless of how bad it was. And a lot of times, Vernon was right. I mean, Elvis was an excessive spender, boy. And when he'd go on those...
Well, you thought money was going out of season.
And Vernon thought at any given time he was going to have to go to work because Elvis was going to go broke.
He thought at times that we were trying to take his place with Elvis. And that's impossible.
The money actually changed him. You know, it did.
That's a good way to put it.
And he thought if you couldn't make Elvis money, you shouldn't be around him. I mean, that was Vernon's thinking. And we weren't, you know, so...
Good point.
But I know the old Vernon before Elvis ever made it, and he was... Vernon was a good man. He really was. You know, I mean, he had his faults. I guess we all do, you know. But I guess maybe I'm defending him somewhat. But, well, that's right. But when it came to that, where Elvis got famous and then the group got around him, then it changed because, like I say, that's all he saw. Not what we were personally doing for Elvis. We weren't making him any money, so I mean, he had done his career up to that point without anybody, really.
But the hardest thing that Elvis did was try, you remember, he'd always try to convince, these guys do this for me. He said, they help me make more money because I'm able to be free to do it. He kept telling Vernon this, and Vernon never understood it.
It was a group of guys. It didn't necessarily have to be us. If it had not been a group of guys who he could be himself with and let off steam and the pressure and all of that, he probably would have died a lot younger than...
Well, see, Elvis knew that.
Absolutely.
Vernon didn't.
But part of it, too, is he was worried a little bit about if Elvis lost all of his money, he might have to go back to work again.
Well, it's like Elvis said, he said, Daddy had a backache for 23 years.
We had some good times, and we had some bad times.
And you hang on to the very, very good times that will drag you through or carry you through the bad times. And it was that way with Elvis. We would put up with, Red and I used to talk about it all the time, we'd put up with all the crap just to get maybe a couple of 3 or 4 days when he was really right.
Yeah.
And we would hang on that. And we knew that he was capable of being that way. What shredded us more than anything else, and I think I can speak for everybody here, is that when he would go into these god-awful tirades, being Elvis, and it tore us apart piece by piece.
But you always knew, like you said, you always knew that good time was going to come back and something good was going to happen.
A nervous Elvis Presley faces the cameras at the end of his military service. He talked to reporters about his next career move.
I'm thinking in terms of, I'd like to do a little more of a serious role, you know, because my ambition is to progress as an actor, which takes a long time, a lot of experience.
He also welcomed the new competition he was sure to face back home.
I mean, if somebody can come up and make it, well, more power to them, because I'm only glad of the success that I have had, you know, and I couldn't be envious of some other young or new guy that's trying to make it too.
All the time he was over there was no new records. Colonel even wanted him to try to record something over there, and he's on a tape record, anything. Mm-hmm. And no way. But he was really worried about his career. He thought, that's it, boys, it's over.
He was very nervous about it.
When Elvis came back, because of what he had been exposed to in that last 2 years, which is a heck of a lot more than he had been exposed to before. I mean, here you have the European touch and the European people, and most of the music over there is normally about 5 to 10 years behind the United States. So he really got into these big songs like, you know, It's Now or Never, and wanting to do all of those big things. And he seemed to, at least he did to me when he came back, to be a little bit more polished in the ways of the world. And like Billy said, you know...
Well, Europe did that for him. Yeah.
And he experienced, you know, some tragedy with his mother passing, and coming back to Graceland for the first time, and she's not there for the first time. And it's even like in his dress. Remember when he came back, he started wearing tuxedos and ascots and cummerbunds. Yeah. And he dressed that way every day almost.
Oh, at dinner we could wear tails at dinner. We didn't have to.
Yeah. But no, you could just sense that he seemed to be a little bit more wiser and a little bit more polished.
It was a challenge. He was ready to get right back into the routine. Either he was going to continue on or total failure, and he didn't know which, so he was ready to push that forward to find out. one thing he was going to do was he was going to prove all these people wrong that said before that he couldn't sing.
And what happened was Elvis got really secure right there in about the middle of 1960 when he signed a 2-picture deal with Walter Mirisch for $500,000 and a percentage of each picture and $75,000 expense money for each picture. So right then he felt secure. If they're going to offer him $1 million there for that, then he started feeling better. And then of course MGM even topped that deal, which we'll talk about later. But he started feeling more secure in 1960, in the middle of it, after coming back, because things were starting to happen again and he knew his career was still on.
And now, here are scenes from Wild in Hollywood, Volume 3 of All the King's Men.
One night, just for the heck of it, I don't know why, but I counted, and there was 7 guys in the house and 152 women.
We had grazing rights, though.
That was the party house. The girls that came up there and the stories about Scatter.
Scatter, Elvis had a chimp he's talking about. Yeah.
And this monkey was an alcoholic. At these parties, everybody, if you set your drink down, it wasn't going to be there if the monkey was in the room. He'd come over and drink it, look up the girls' dresses.
And we didn't train him to do this, but Scatter would lay on his back on a couch, lay halfway on and halfway off, and if a girl walked by, he'd take his little finger and crook his finger and pull her skirt up and look up under her skirt.
Those girls up there, the ones that were really, were afraid of him, he knew it. And they would go into that bathroom before they could get to it. He'd be there waiting on them to go inside with them. So they had to try to work out a thing where they could go real fast, and he would still beat them. They'd shut the door thinking he was outside, and he was inside. He got in before them, and you'd hear him open that door, scream, and come running back out. It was just a lot of crazy things like that.
Well, Wallace would use this to do that. I mean,
You know that he used the money off of one of Elvis' pictures to finance Beckett.
exactly what he
$8
did.
million he made.
Beckett was financed buying Elvis pictures. Exactly
Yeah, Blue Hawaii.
Yeah.
$8 million.
Yeah, he made a killing off Blue Hawaii.
Blue Hawaii, it cost $1 million to make it, and it made over $8 million. And Beckett ran like $5 or $6 million to make. But back then, for a picture to make $8 million, which is 8 times what it cost, today would be $240 to $250 million, because they're spending $25 million on pictures today. So it sounds very small, but in 1960, 61, 62, an $8 million gross picture that you make profit on, there just wasn't that many of them.
That made Elvis mad. He said he puts me in all of this crap and I make all of his money so he can go make pictures like Beckett for Peter O'Toole and Richard Burton. He said, why don't you spend some of that money to make a good movie with me?
One day, he went into Juliet's trailer, to rehearse. And all of us are sitting outside, pulling our thumbs, and I said, well, we're going to have a little fun here. I went up, Elvis, what? Here comes Frank. What? Well, we had a joke that's what we do now, and look, here comes Frank. And yeah. I said, oh, shit. I mean, I just did this. If I do it again, he's going to throw a bucket of water or kick me in the face or something. And this time, I just kind of eased over. We could see him come through this big door, and tap, tap, tap. Elvis, no shit, it's really Frank. He said, fuck you. No, man, it's Frank. Get away from the door. Damn it. And Frank's getting closer, and I said, oh, boy. So I sit down. How you doing, Frank? Frank knocked on the door. I said, what? What do you say, Elvis? Oh, Frank.
Oh, man.
Thank God, they were rehearsing.